Alright, cards on the table. The AMD R9 270 is pretty much just an R9 270X that lost the genetic lottery. It's a lot like its bigger brother, only a bit slower and less desirable. If you watched my video on the 270X and wanted to know how the 270 compares, just subtract 10% or so from those scores and you're probably on the right track. So, video over? No, I think we can still find something new to talk about. Since initially reviewing the R9 270X a few months ago, a few things have changed here on Iceberg. For one, the RPG PC, or reasonably priced gaming PC, has had its first upgrade, taking it from 8GB to 16GB of RAM. I have a separate video in which I look into that upgrade in greater depth, including whether or not it was necessary. Also, I've made some substitutions from my benchmark suite. I learn something new with every video I make, and since those early days in my channel, I've learned that Valorant can be CPU limited with even a cheap graphics card, and that the medium is a giant pain in the ass to benchmark. Of course, that's not all that happened in the last 6 months. In fact, at the tail end of June, AMD announced that this card, as well as every other card in the GCN 1, 2 and 3 families, is now to be filed away in the cabinet marked Legacy. What that means for the R9 series of cards is, well, unknown. While the termination of driver support shouldn't immediately end the viability of this card for gamers, it does throw doubt on their long-term value going into the 2020s. Here in 2021, we're only a couple of driver releases behind the more recent architectures. Let's see how things are holding up. The first recent addition to my benchmark suite isn't the newest release, but as a free-to-play esports title, Apex Legends is definitely in this card's wheelhouse. 1080 at lowest settings is as low as we need to go to get a 60 FPS average here, with 1% lows in the mid-20s. I briefly tested at 720 and saw numbers in the 80s and up to the hundreds, so if you prefer higher FPS over better visibility, then that is certainly something this card is capable of. Resident Evil 8 is among the second batch of titles AMD has announced that will be compatible with their FSR upscaling tech, intended to give the faster frame rates of running at low resolutions, but without the associated loss of quality. FSR can't come soon enough, as even at 720 low, the R9 270 and other low-end cards slow down below 30 FPS during cutscenes, causing the audio to lose sync with the video. This can be mitigated on some GPUs by turning off CAS in the settings, but it doesn't seem to make a difference here. Averages in general gameplay seem to be in the high 30s and low 40s. Valheim's performance seems to have been improving of late. Previously it had been unrealistically slow and poorly optimised, as one might expect for a game still in development, but lately some aspects, in particular the impact of dynamic lighting, have been dramatically improved. This seems to be reflected in the 54 FPS average I got from testing the R9 270 in early July. Like Valheim, Enlisted is an early access title, in this case a Battlefield-style World War II shooter. As such, it's pretty likely that performance is going to change over time, so bear in mind that code optimizations might make this run better in the future. As of right now, 1080 low settings gives an average FPS of 50 and lows of 25. I'm not in favour of dropping resolutions further, as it's not an up-close and personal style game, with most combat occurring against small clusters of pixels hiding in the bushes. Cyberpunk 2077 has had a number of patches since I tested the 270X back in February, so although we have a slight clock speed deficit compared to the X model, I'd hope to see a performance increase here. This, unfortunately, doesn't really seem to be the case, at least with this generation of cards. Averages are only about 10% lower than the 270X was earlier in the year, with 720 low settings recording an average of 33 FPS. The biggest change since my 270X video is my wounded pride. After one too many comments about my shitty Fortnite skills, I've decided that my videos will now only feature me looking like a stone cold badass, which has proven to be a massive challenge for my editing skills. Also, like with most live service games, performance has a tendency to drift with each seasonal update. Averages in 1080 competitive settings have dropped from the 92 FPS of the 270X in February to 71 FPS in July. This might be entirely down to the 125 MHz slower core clock, but I doubt it. Warzone has also had a new seasonal update, jumping on the 80s bandwagon and apparently bringing with it a pretty large hit to performance. Approaching a smooth experience on the R9 270 then still requires playing the game at PS2 level quality settings, but even then, 720 low only manages to give us 45 FPS on average. This is about 20% lower than the 10% faster 270X scored in February. The other 10% is presumably down to developer indifference. Running at 1080 low settings, Doom Eternal performs much the same as it did on the 270X in my last video, coming in at 48 FPS average with lows of 35. You might wonder why I bothered including it again, but for me it's something of a sanity check. Elsewhere this month I've been looking at Nvidia's cards from the same era, and the R9 270 does noticeably better than the GTX 670 and 770 here. It's by complete accident that I discovered that Watch Dogs Legion runs better in DX11 on the R9 270 than in DX12. In fact, I actually completely missed that DX11 was an option until I was running benchmarks for another video. My DX12 tests at 720 averaged 31 FPS and dropped as low as 21. Switching to DX11 saw those numbers climb to 42 and 23 respectively. It seems that lately Genshin Impact have been enforcing their 30 and 60 FPS limits, even with VSync turned off. With low-end cards then, the question is, how high can we turn quality up before frame rates start to be affected? At 1080 medium settings, averages stick to 60 with 1% lows dropping to 34. Pushing up to high sees lows of about the same, but averages down to 49. The visual effect is subtle, with shadows being most obviously affected, so you won't be missing out much if you opt to stick with the lower settings. So, what did all that achieve? Have we begun to see the decline of the GCN cards already? No, they're only 1 or 2 driver updates behind the newer cards, and the rot hasn't set in yet. Check out my other video to see what's likely to happen when it does. Did I prove that games have been optimised in the last 6 months? On the whole, not so much. Only Valheim shows a marked improvement over the previous video, and a couple of games seem to have gone in the other direction. Was it just a sad attempt to capitalise on the popularity of one of my early videos? Shut up. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.